Welcome to Ones and Tooze, Foreign Policy's economics podcasts. Every week we take a couple of data points. We tell you how they explain the world. I'm Cameron Abadi, deputy editor here at Foreign Policy. I'm coming to you from Berlin. And across the pond in New York is, of course, FP columnist, Columbia University professor Adam Tooze. Hi, Adam.
Hi, Cameron.
So in a bit, we're going to sink our teeth into the world of pet care, and more specifically, the world of pet food. And we're going to unpack the profits in that sector of the economy and tell you what it says about the broader economy. But first, we want to take a look at something in the headlines like we normally do. And with that, our first data point. That is 10.4 million. That's the number of jobs that are currently unfilled in the U.S. economy as of September, according to the latest data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That's not much different than the record high of 10.9 million openings that were recorded back in July. So as vaccinations have increased and the economy has continued to open up, employers have been finding it incredibly difficult to find workers to fill jobs.
It's a sign of the times. Employees at this Nebraska Burger King telling customers, we all quit. And it's not just happening there.
They're now looking at the door and wondering if the grass and paychecks are greener on the other side.
And it's leaving many workplaces seriously understaffed.
A tremendous number of people have left the labor force during the pandemic, 5 million people, according to Goldman Sachs. Many of those people are still continuing to voluntarily quit jobs every month. 3% of the entire U.S. labor force chose to quit work in September, according to the same set of data that reported all those job openings. The quit rate typically averages around 2%. That was before the pandemic, but now it's been hovering around the 3% mark for most of this year. Economists are calling this the Great Resignation. It's a catchy name, but from what I can tell, economists have a harder time figuring out why exactly this is happening, much less whether this is just a momentary blip or it's a whole new economic era. And that brings us to you, Adam. So the first question that comes to mind is whether there's an underlying economic cause underneath this whole Great Resignation. I mean, is it the number of job openings that's creating this whole wave of people quitting jobs? I mean, is it because they're confident they can find another one? Or is there really a deeper cultural shift at work? I mean, is the pandemic gotten people to reevaluate what they value in their lives? What do you think?
I think we're finding out, to be honest. But I mean, my money would be on the first explanation that people quit when there are job openings for them to go to and when they feel confident about that. I mean, it's telling who's quitting right now. In general, the resignation rates are highest in the areas which have just been exposed to huge stress and burnout over the last 18 months. So if you look at manufacturing or finance, we're not really seeing the same kind of surge of quitting as we are in healthcare, where almost 4% of the workforce have quit their jobs, or tech, where people have been under huge pressure. And then highest of all in accommodation and food services, where 7% of the workforce dropped out of their current employment and their current jobs in August alone. That's 740,000 people in August working in leisure and hospitality who quit jobs in hotels, bars, restaurants, theme parks, you name it. Women are somewhat more likely to be quitting. That could be a gendered effect because of childcare issues with the Delta variant sweeping through. It could also be a sectoral effect. The sort of sectors that have been under highest stress have been the ones that women are in. It's really, I think, an interesting thesis to ask also how far this is a form of protest, if you like. The great economist, political economist, Albert Hirschman coined this phrase of people having the choice between exit and voice. And to quit is to exit a situation, right? Rather than to try and change it through voice. So who is not quitting? Well, people in, better paid white collar jobs in sectors like finance. If you go to a different sector of the labour market, people like teachers. Now, teachers, you think, have plenty of reason to be upset about the situation, but they haven't been quitting in the same rates. And one reason why might be that they have voice. They have voice because they're unionized. They're one of the highest, most heavily unionized sectors of the American labor force. So I think that's a very important dynamic here, is like quitting is a choice that you make under circumstances that don't look too risky. If quitting seems like your best way out of the situation rather than arguing your position from where you stand and trying to improve your conditions that way. It's also a choice, I think, on the whole, quitting that older workers make. So it's quite difficult to disentangle temporary quitting from long-term retirement. But of the 5 million or so Americans who have left the workforce since the pandemic kicked off, permanently left it, about 3.4 million were over the age of 55, as you'd expect. So a variety of different factors in play here, but I'm definitely going with circumstance and then how much voice you think you've got in your place of work.
Okay, but this raises then the question of why the Great Resignation is a problem at all. I mean, you're pointing to people retiring in part. You're pointing to people leaving jobs that were intensely stressful. I mean, if people are autonomously choosing to quit jobs, I mean, shouldn't we be happy for them? Why would economists think of this as a problem? And maybe another way of putting that is, what's the immediate cost for the economy in all of this beyond just certain inconveniences when you're shopping or trying to get something to eat?
Yeah, I think in fairness to economists, I don't think they do think it's a problem as such. As exactly as you say, it's an exercise of agency on the part of workers, of autonomy. It's a kind of empowerment, right? It's also a bad sign, of course, that jobs were so unpleasant or in various ways unattractive that people just want to dump them. One factor that's been pointed to, in fact, is that many of these people are leaving jobs in the service sector, and there's apparently been, along with the Great Resignation, the great rudeness. It's just simply the toxicity that has swept over so many workers in the service sector workplaces across America since the reopening, of people just letting out their frustration, arguing about face masks, all of that kind of stuff. When people become unemployed, one of the things we lament is that all of the sort of soft tissue, the human and cultural capital, the know-how invested in long-term employment, all of that is broken and lost, right, and sort of thrown on the scrap heap. And in a sense, something similar like happens with a voluntary quit as well, and it's catching. So one of the effects that we've seen in workplaces recently is that if one person quits a team, then other people are quite likely to quit it too, because they can see, as it were, that investment fragmenting before their eyes. That's a net loss for the economy as a whole when that happens. There's no winner there. You just lose all of that cultural capital know-how. A Gallup poll recently found that no more than somewhere like a fifth to a third of the workforce are self-identified as invested in their workplaces. So that's one of the reasons why people go. And you could say, to that extent, that moving is efficiency enhancing from the point of view of the economy, because they're moving from workplaces where they're disengaged, which according to the Gallup poll produces a hit to productivity, a reduction in productivity of almost 20%. So people, when you compare engaged to unengaged workers, that's the difference. And if you, as it were, shift and sort and move people to workplaces where they feel happier, then like for like, there's actually a gain in overall productivity. So complex set of trade-offs.
Okay. I mean, I do want to burrow down on something it seems like you were suggesting, which is that maybe some of these jobs that people were leaving just weren't very good in the first place. I mean, you point to the great rudeness, but when I think of the times I've worked in service jobs, they weren't a bed of roses anytime, even before the pandemic. So I guess that raises the question of, should these jobs exist at all? I mean, or rather than, I guess, trying to think of ways we can fill them, I guess we could raise wages and get people into these jobs. But isn't it another way of thinking of empty jobs that can't get filled, that maybe can we innovate our way out of the jobs in the first place? Can we have robots serving us in restaurants or washing dishes in the back rather than forcing people to serve us in that way? I mean, should we be sort of breaking down the quality of a job when we're talking about these statistics?
Well, I mean, in fairness to the BLS, the Bureau of Labour Statistics, the quit data which are cited in these headline numbers come from a thing called JOLTS. It's a particular survey system, which is a fairly stripped down survey designed to deliver rapid information about job openings, hence the acronym, job openings, quit rates. And it does, in fact, include data about the industries that people are quitting from. So that's where we know. But it's a relatively recent series. It's less than 20 years old. It didn't actually originally produce state-level data until 2019. But if you can put this series together with other series from the BLS to get an impression of some of the backdrop here. So we know, for instance, from weekly earnings data that, in October, leisure and hospitality added 164,000 jobs, paying on average less than $500 a week, which is pretty miserable by any standard, compared to, say, business services that added 100,000 jobs, paying $1,372 per week. And I think that helps to put in perspective why folks in hospitality, might be quitting. To put those numbers again in perspective, what is the average, what is the median weekly earning in the United States? Well, it's $765 per week. So the folks leaving those hospitality, leisure sector jobs are being paid less than the median by a considerable margin and really bad wages.
I've already been hearing people talk just in sort of casual conversations about how more migrants could be brought in to fill this labor shortage. That could be a solution to some of the problems employers are facing. And that got me thinking whether this kind of points to tensions that exist in the political coalition of the Democratic Party, which is obviously in power in the White House and in Congress. I mean, overall, it seems to me it's a party that on one hand says it's pro-worker, it represents the interests of workers and unions. On the other hand, it generally has a consistent pro-immigration message. But are moments like this a time when that kind of seems to be in tension?
You clearly would expect the flow of migrants to the US, which has been lackluster recently, to speed up as labour markets tighten. I mean, the one misunderstanding here is that migrants aren't brought into the United States. The US States doesn't run guest worker programs. People flow and they're super smart and they pick their moments to come. And it's easy to imagine, I think, that, the current regular work visa programs, which were down to 25K or so in recent months per month, could rebound to something more like 100K, which over a year would give you maybe 1.2, 1.5 million extra workers. Would they fill the right slots? Would they match this demand? It's very unclear. The crucial thing to note is that migrants, as opposed to people who are driven by sheer desperation from, desperately impoverished Central America or whatever, are highly sensitive to economic conditions. So Mexican migration is directly driven now by the US labor market. And that then also makes it quite difficult to disentangle whether or not the trade-off, the dilemma that you're pointing to, is really real. Because if the migrants come where the labor market is tight and wages are pushing higher, the effect in dampening those is generally speaking moderated. So migrants don't come to the US economy when people most desperately need jobs. So that simple sort of 101 economics trade-off just isn't a reality. It's very difficult to observe. A Nobel Prize was won recently for finding an instance where you could neatly isolate this effect. And they're quite rare. As for the Democratic Party, well, this is a really big, complicated issue. I don't think it's fair to say that the Democrats are pro-migration per se. But I think the position of the Democratic Party would be that it's important to give migrants who are in the US a regularized position, precisely so that they can get decent conditions for them and their families. And on the other hand, so that they can't be used to undercut American workers, right? The regularization of the status of migrants is a win-win, and it heads towards tightening the conditions for employers generally.
Okay, so finally, to turn this whole conversation on its head a bit, I guess I want to ask, why don't more of us quit our jobs? I mean, this is not a comment on foreign policy or on Columbia University, both of which are fine institutions. But plenty of us could probably afford to quit or step back from our jobs, at least for a while. And from what I remember, John Maynard Keynes, the economist, he predicted that a more productive future society would work less, right, rather than working more, as it usually seems that most of us are doing these days. I don't know. So have our jobs become self-imposed cages in a way? I mean, is that the message of the Great Resignation? Should it be an inspiration to more of us to quit?
Yeah, I mean, I think Americans could certainly, consider working less. If you look at the OECD's average hours worked, it's quite stark, actually. So I took the numbers for 2019 because 2020 is going to be distorted by, short time and so on. So the OECD, which is the, developed country club, both Europe, North America, Latin America to a degree, Asia, all countries are included. So that it reckons that Americans actually worked on average 1,767 hours in 2019. So to put that in perspective, for both Germany and the UK, the number is in the 1300s, so 1330, 1350. So that's a 400-hour difference in annual work time. So at 40 hours per week, that's 10 weeks. That's staggering. And before you begin to think like, okay, those American numbers, they've got to be wrong. This is crazy. Like they aren't. They're just the work rate that you see in the middle income countries in the OECD club. So the countries which have work rates close to the United States are Costa Rica and Chile. And Mexico has the highest of the poorest, I think, of the OECD countries, has the highest annual work rate at 2,100. But America is as close to Mexico as it is to Germany and Britain in terms of the annual hours worked. That's a huge difference. And, for those of us in the US who earn good money and work in great jobs, at one level, it's a different society. It's a different attitude to work. But of course, the vast majority of our fellow citizens don't. They work tough jobs that are grinding, and they do it, as we've just seen, for really modest levels of wage. And that's a tough story that those numbers tell. And as for the quitting, that too, it's like there's a sort of sad story in the back here, because if you go back through the data as best we can estimate, because that JOLT survey isn't around, but there's data that we can use to estimate quit rates in earlier decades. And it's pretty clear that in the 60s and 70s, in the good times for the US economy, the quit rate was much higher than it became in the last couple of decades. It's really in the 80s that Americans have increasingly clung to their jobs for fear, if you like, that they wouldn't get anything else, that nothing good would come along. And so it's possibly true that, some people are experiencing a kind of Keynesian moment of emancipation right now. They've got comfortable retirement funds or whatever and good prospects. But what I think we're mainly seeing here is millions of people stuck in badly paid jobs with little satisfaction who are using and seizing this opportunity to look for a better deal.
At the very least, maybe the lesson is that we should all be nicer to service workers,
Oh, for sure. Yeah, really.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
the great nastiness is a horrible thought.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of whether that lures people back to work, it seems like that's a good thing generally. So we're going to take a short break here, and then we'll come back. And like I said at the top, we will talk about pet food and what that says about our spending habits. So that's after the break. Okay, welcome back. I promised a big number. This is one not related to the news, and here it is. It is $37.96 billion. That's $37.96 billion. And that is the total amount of money that Americans spent in 2020 on pet food and pet treats. $37.96 billion. So that's a lot of money. It's more than Americans spend on all their reading material over the course of a year. That would be $15 billion. It's a little less than the Americans spend on the Marine Corps. The budget for the Marines is $46 billion, so that's the general ballpark.
No dog days of summer for General Mills. A boom in pet food fueled its top line.
Fresh pet food is one of the fastest growing segments in the pet care industry, and it's become the standard to have it with human-grade ingredients.
Chef Bobby Flay is expanding from restaurants into pet food. Flay unveiling Made by Nacho, a pet food for cats inspired and created in partnership with his own cat.
I look at this and I don't know, I can't help but wonder what this says about our priorities. And I mean that sincerely, not as a rhetorical question. Is all this spending on pets, I don't know, is it kind of obscene? Is it, pretty beautiful in a way? Either way, how did it come to this? $37.96 billion. I was hoping we could get to the heart of this pet economy, Adam, but first, For the sake of full disclosure, do you want to tell listeners what sort of pets you've had in your life? I'll admit right here that I don't have any pets now. And as a child, I've only ever had those kind of sort of pitiful goldfish you kind of would get from the fair, and then they would die a couple days after we brought them home. So I'm not much of a pet owner. How about you, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a pet person all my life. I mean, really, goldfish, hamsters, guinea pigs, tortoises, rabbits. So now we have a little dog, Ruby, apple of our eye, feisty, opinionated, 5-year-old, 10-pound on a slim day, Havanese princess. And we're one of 63 million households who in 2020 in the United States owned at least one dog. That's 63 out of 120 million households. And overall, the pet industry and the vets and so on estimate that 70% of American households own some kind of pet.
Okay, so we've established that I'm in the minority here. But now to start this conversation about the pet economy, I was hoping we could first put it in the context of the broader animal economy. I mean, animals play all sorts of roles in economic life beyond serving as pets. They provide milk, eggs, meat. Some people use them for clothing. They're part of the tourist economy, I guess, as well. They attract people to zoos, safaris, I guess. I don't know, but do we have some sense of how the pet economy compares in size to this broader animal economy, Adam?
The total pet spend in the US is probably in excess of $100 billion a year. And then you compare that, I found a good number for horses. Apparently 800,000 households in America owned a horse. That really took me totally by surprise. And they spend $39 billion on them because they're very expensive beasts. On the grimmer side, the total spend on meat packing and processing in the beef pork segment is $152 billion. For poultry, it's $65.6 billion. I think those are comparable numbers to these pet numbers that we're using. For dairy products, it's $123 billion. So pets are really up there with the food chain animals. Panning out globally, global wildlife tourism is a big, big deal. Again, these are the sorts of numbers where they're industry statistics. They want to tell you how important they are. They think it's $120 billion worldwide in spending on wildlife tourism in mainly East Africa, Asia. So all in all, yeah, I mean, pets are a big deal. Like $100 billion stacks up. Animals are in a significant way, as it were, incorporated into our lives as companion animals, as pet animals, as opposed to utility objects of as biological organisms of utility or prey for us to hunt.
Okay, Adam. And now, analytically, from an economic perspective, can we differentiate between the kinds of consumption opportunities that animals offer? I mean, on the one hand, you could say animals provide us with emotional companionship. On the other hand, you could say animals provide us with food. We could say those are both types of consumption. Is there a meaningful difference there from an economic perspective? Do we consume our pets in the same sense we consume a steak? Is that a meaningful way to frame it?
It's such a horrible analogy. I mean, it really brought me up short. I mean, but it brings you up short because it hits so close to home. I mean, it hits so close to home in my case that I've actually given up eating meat since the dog came into our lives. I just can't do it. I mean, the thought of eating a mammal just turns my stomach nowadays. She, of course, eats meat all the time. But if you're consuming anything, I think like the category is like it's much more like consuming therapy or consuming wellness in some way, right? I mean, remember we've had this chat. Like I think American spending on mental health is $200 billion plus a year. I would add the pet element to that, like make it $300 billion, 200 plus 100. Pets are comfort. They're company. They deal with issues of loneliness. There's very, very serious scientific research that shows that petting, the physical act of petting a pet reduces blood pressure. It's kind of a gentle form of gym, like you've got to take them for walks. So I would almost go as far as to say that rather than consuming a steak, if you're gonna think of an analogy, it's a little bit more like adopting a child. Though I haven't done that quite yet.
Oh, and just to clarify here, I'm not suggesting that these are equivalent types of consumption. I just want to sort of raise the question of whether the economic categories can capture this difference that you're referring to, or whether they sort of suggest that these are kind of like fungible types of consumption. You could either that these are equivalent even when they're, as you're sort of very poignantly saying, they're not. I mean, but we do draw a line with kids. We say that spending on kids we wouldn't call consumption, but spending on dogs we would. I just wanted to sort of ask whether economists can split that difference, but
at some point we're going to have to ask a real economist. It's a little unfair. I feel like we're using our phantom economist as the diagnostic here. The person who is emotionally blind enough to imagine that owning a dog is like eating a steak, which then provokes this conversation. Of course they don't exist. There's no such person. But anyway, it's a fascinating thing to navigate.
So get back to the numbers that we're talking about here. I mean, has the amount that Americans spend on pets, has that gone up in real terms over time? I mean, beyond the rate of inflation? I mean, if it has, is there a specific point in time at which pet spending just took off?
Yeah, there's actually data on this. If you go to the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, their big Fred data bank, they have a pet spending series, and it would seem that the 1970s are really the takeoff point. If you believe the official data, then pet spending since the early 70s has increased about 50-fold, whereas overall consumption has increased by a factor of 16. Both of those are in nominal terms. So leaving the inflation in, how have the two increased? And one by 50, the other by a factor of 16. And if you dig around on this, it's stunning. Like investment banks like Morgan Stanley are actually specifically advising their clients on what they expect the future growth of pet food industry to be. And they're projecting it could be as much as 300 billion by 2030. That's overall spending on pets in that case. So it's clearly just, pets are things that animals that people love. And so as they get better off, their demand increases. It's, as the economists would say, it's a consumption that's highly elastic with income.
Okay, I'm going to have to look into maybe investing in the pet food economy, doubling by 2030. That's quite a prediction. But here's where I'm going to again now betray that I've never really been a pet owner. But you'll correct me if I'm wrong, Adam. As far as I would tell or guess, animals are not terribly discriminating when it comes to their food. I mean, so that raises to me the question of whether all this spending on pet food is really even for the pet satisfaction or not. I mean, is that really for the owner's satisfaction? I mean, how should we understand the choice here that owners are making to spend all this money? I mean, part of me thinks it would be sort of this kind of conspicuous consumption, but this is happening in people's homes. No one's watching. No one knows when you're spending this money. So maybe I'm getting something completely wrong, though, here, Adam.
Yeah, I'm just chuckling here because, next time you're in New York, we're going to go to a pet store, or rather, we're going to get Ruby, I kid you not, to take us to the pet store and show you her favorite food. She will literally take you on a tour of a pet store, but filled with different types of food, and sniff and sample them. And animals, they have weird tastes. She loves her trash. She loves dead rats. Part of the interaction is they like you to talk their food up to them. They like you to talk dirty about it. Oh, it's going to be so good. You're not going to believe how delicious this sausage is going to be. Let me have some of your sausage. And they're completely into this, this conversation. It's very interactive. They watch you. They watch every other dog. They're super. It's very relational for them. What the food that's good for them is very highly conditioned by what other animals, what other dogs around them, and what the people around them are eating. So Ruby doesn't get booze, obviously, but she loves champagne corks. I mean, we like our sparkling wine, and you only have to start unwrapping the champagne cork, and she is in the kitchen waiting for the pot, go off with this stinky, slightly yeasty flavored thing that she's going to go and chew to destruction. And guess what the fastest growing segment is? It's CBD.
Oh, wow.
You've ever had to travel with a pet, wow, because traveling with a stoned dog is a whole hell of a lot more fun than if she's wide awake.
Okay. You've successfully persuaded me, Adam, that pets take pleasure in the types of food they're getting. I guess I should have known that. You also gave me an interesting idea for a restaurant all involving dirty talk of food. That maybe people would work on people too. I don't know. That's quite the offer. But to get to my final question here, what's I guess the implicit message in separating and tabulating the amount of money we're spending on pets in this way in the first place? I mean, is the message to suggest that we could take this money and spend it elsewhere? I mean, does an economist look at spending habits as basically interchangeable? Just to get back to the point I was trying to make before. I mean, should we take pet owner preferences here at face value and as something more fixed, as essential spending rather than something more discretionary?
Clearly, at some level, you're absolutely right. It's discretionary. And I think we got into talking about this because I use this pet food test as a benchmark of whether we're serious about things. Like if you want to know whether we're serious about investment in energy research, compare it to pet food. And right now, globally, governments around the world don't spend more on fundamental energy research than American households spend on pets. And, that seems wrong. Given climate change, we ought to be like spending more than that, in a sense, because we love our pets. Right? This is a priority. But I mean, this question of yours has really made me think. So here's a test, like essential discretionary. Here's a test. So currently, there are at least 19 million pets in the United States living with families whose income level is below the poverty line. So which is triple the number of dogs and cats who are given over to animal shelters every year. So that means that millions of people in the US right now are finding ways to feed and care for animals, even in the face of really considerable hardship for themselves and their families. So that's, a commitment. And that kind of suggests to me discretion might not really be quite the right word here, right? 52% of the clients of the ASPCA animal hospitals in New York City are living on less than $15,000 per year, and yet they're bringing their animals in to be taken care of. 40% of the folks that end up giving up their animals to shelters say they would keep them if they could afford the vet bills. So I think that really gives you an idea of just how serious this linkage is between people and their pets. It's frankly, if I was sleeping rough, the first thing I would want is a dog, not for protection, but just for company, right? It's somebody, it's something, it's not, I say somebody because that's what comes to mind, but it's a being to share life with. And that's ultimately, I think, what's at stake here.
That's persuasive that animals are, I guess, pets are more parts of our family than objects of consumption.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We just don't, I guess, have the economic language to describe that yet. But okay, that will do it for yet another episode of Ones and Twos. We hope you've enjoyed listening. Some of you have written in to ask for some reading assignments. We're going to come up with some books to maybe think about getting yourself or your friends or families for the holidays. We also want to hear your suggestions. You can always tweet at us or email us at podcast@foreignpolicy.com. Ones and Twos is written and produced by me, Cameron Abadi, along with Adam Tooze. It's produced by Rob Sachs and Laura Rosbrow-Tellem. The executive editor of podcasts at Foreign Policy is the one and only Dan Efron. Thanks, and we're going to take off next week for the holidays. That's Thanksgiving for those of you abroad, the nicest U.S. holiday there is. And otherwise, we will see you back in your feed in 2 weeks. And thanks for listening, and see you then.
See you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, okay. I think we ended up on the same page. I wasn't trying to seem like a monster, like a kind of. I wasn't trying to come across like a serial
You're
killer,
doing a great job.
like a sociopath.
You're doing
but
you're a great foil, Cameron.